Hello, welcome to another Monday. It is November 21st, 2022. And today, the chart that has caught my attention this past week is a chart of Matthew Perry, a star of Friends, who's floundered a bit with addiction issues over the past decade or so. And he's in the news because he's recently published a memoir about his life called Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. And so let's take a look at his chart to see what is going on in his life. We see that he was born in August of 1969. And so this is kind of an interesting month. If we look back in history, we know that this was a very dramatic month. Earlier in the month, the Manson family killings occurred in Los Angeles. And then, like a week later, in fact, just 3 or 4 days before Matthew Perry was born, we had the first Woodstock. And so we experienced in that month just the highs and lows of what was going on in the 1960s. And if you look at Matthew Perry's chart, you can see that Pluto during this time in Virgo was with the South Node. So there was that kind of draining out with the Manson family killings of all of the ideals of the 60s. You know, it had been kind of subverted by Charles Manson through his manipulations of his family and the drug culture into being something which started out to be really beautiful and became something very terrible. But notice at the same time, Jupiter and Uranus had met in Libra. And so we think of Woodstock as being this time of, peace and love and people just spontaneously coming together and creating this big, amazing, culturally significant event, based around Venus-ruled Libra music and performance. And so it's kind of interesting if we think about those two energies that are present in the sky at the time of Matthew Perry's birth, how in a way his life has really encompassed both of those. He's had amazing success as an actor, especially, through the shows Friends, where, he just brought a lot of happiness and joy through his work to many people. And, they created a show that continues to entertain new generations of people. Just that kind of hopefulness of being young and trying to figure out your life and having things eventually fall into place. All of that energy is in Matthew Perry's chart. But you see also what he refers to as the big terrible thing is his decades-long struggle with addiction. And you see that with the Pluto South Node and his own Mercury attached to that conjunction. So that while he's on one hand, led a very charmed life, on the other hand, he's led, in a sense, a very tortured life. His book really outlines the long struggle he's had to overcome addiction, the hundreds of thousands of dollars he's spent over the years, the many times he's relapsed. So that struggle is present in the chart as well. And so if we think about, he's born Sun in Leo. Sun loves to be in Leo. It's its own sign. So it's, just shining forth in the sky and in the first house of his chart. So he is this Sun in Leo through and through. He's a double Leo with Leo rising and Sun in Leo, which is a very intense energy. But yet, when you think of how he can entertain and make people laugh, it ends up being a very charmed energy. However, when it comes to maybe having some objectivity with yourself and dealing with relationships with others, it can become a little bit too much. And so what's happening with this Sun in his chart? We see, number one, just how beautifully it's placed in the chart. You notice that it is enshrined to his midheaven. And so we've got an almost exact 2 degrees away from being able to take that energy and just shoot it out into the world with his midheaven. His book details, he was struggling as an actor with a lot of other people who didn't make it, and he just through kind of a series of circumstances just, was able to go, into this sitcom that went big. And so his kind of luck and success in life is shown by that aspect. And notice that it's also in sextile to that IC. He was born with fairly well-known parents. His mother was press secretary to Pierre Trudeau in Canada and later married Keith Morrison, the broadcaster. And then his father was the Old Spice Man, very handsome actor who appeared in a number of commercials throughout the years. So, he's got that kind of charmed aspect with his roots, and then with his ability to, create a career in the world with that Leo sun. However, you see other things happening with that Leo sun as well. We've got that sun in square to Neptune in Scorpio in his 4th house. And so this, kind of charmed aspect with his beautiful parents, his beautiful and successful parents, they divorced when he was 6 months old. They went off and each of them married another spouse. They each started other families. And so he was kind of left, that Neptune in the 4th house with a rootless feeling, going back and forth between parents, not really belonging to either family. And you think of in Scorpio, a 4th house Scorpio is someone who has a deep need for connections and roots. And he was just missing it as a child. In fact, he writes in his book, he felt like he pretty much raised himself. And of course, this Scorpio 4th house is further deepened by that moon placed in Scorpio, that there would be a sense that he was not quite well nurtured as a child, that there's some sort of hunger, something that's always missing, that he's going to seek to fill with other things in his life. And then we see that this Scorpio moon is also affected by an almost exact opposition to Saturn. So you can see kind of that pull between private and public. A Saturn Taurus 10th house would be somebody who wants to establish themselves in a very solid way in the world as somebody who's okay. They've got it together. They're building their life, their successful life. And you can see that he maintained his role as a successful actor through many years of addiction. And it wasn't really until, after he left Friends and his career kind of faltered and his addiction started taking over more that he faltered. And so while he's okay up here, there's always this Scorpio moon down here in the 4th house that's feeling insecure, not okay. So that sense of having to cover up, you think of a Scorpio moon being someone who covers up their feelings by projecting this kind of solid, I'm okay image in the world. And so you can see how these conflicts could lead eventually to some problems with addiction. On one hand, you can see a positive thing in his chart is this Mars in Sagittarius. Mars rules this 4th house. It rules his Scorpio moon. And so this Mars in Sagittarius in the house of pleasures and joys could show, how he found success. His midheaven is ruled by Mars. So he found success in a creative field. Also Sagittarius, that kind of that expansive, that kind of making people laugh, that kind of joy of life. And also you think about this as being sports. And as a young man, he was a tennis champ in Canada. And so he found different things when he was younger to help that Scorpio moon, through his creative endeavors, through his, even through his career itself when he was a little older, he was able to, through creativity, through fun, through enjoyment, through that Sagittarian sense of always questing and finding something new that's around the corner, he was able to nurture that moon, but yet there was something that went deeper, that all that he was doing in his fifth house was not really enough to keep him feeling that gnawing need filled in some way. And so, of course, this is when we've got addiction stepping in with that Sun square Neptune. While he wasn't able to find that security within his own private life, he was able to find it by kind of going into drug addiction. First it started out, I think, with drinking with friends, and then it led to pills after an injury. And that multiplied to the point that he was taking, he said, 50 plus pills a day, and drinking enormous amounts of alcohol. And in fact, he even got to the point where it just caught up with him. Kind of during the years Pluto was moving through his sixth house, and he ended up in the hospital with a burst colon and just deathly ill for many months. And so this addiction has really been, like he said, the big, terrible thing in life. And you think it kind of at the root of that is just this Leo sun that wants to be seen, wants to be appreciated, wants to feel that he has somebody at home who's loving him best of all, and finding it, in the very false path of addiction. And you also see with this chart how that second house, that Mercury attached to the Pluto South node, would affect his ability to think well of himself. You think of that Mercury in Virgo, it's exalted, in its own sign in Virgo. So he's very sharp, very intelligent, very, quick with his quick-witted. I always say Virgo is a very funny sign. They can, because their observational powers are just so keen, they can pick up things that are funny. In fact, one of the things he was noted for in Friends was that he could deliver a line, could you be any more transparent, and just the way he would emphasize things. So he was able to really use that Mercury in Virgo in a very positive way, but yet you can see how with the South Node and Pluto, he could also turn that critical faculty on himself. And, each relapse would make him feel even worse. That South Node in the second house of not just, our own possessions, but our own self-possession, how we feel about ourselves, our self-confidence. And you can see that South Node in there kind of points to when we kind of move away into that North Node in Pisces, that more inclusive, more compassionate, less turned on the self, more open to others. And in the eighth house, which we think of as the needs of others, when we can go in that direction, it can lead to some healing. And that's something else his book details, that when he was struggling, in this dark pit of his addiction, it's when he got out into treatment, started connecting with other addicts, forming communities with them, that he was able to start moving away from his really deadly addictive patterns. And there's other things in the chart that indicate this kind of path of hope as well. You think that because he was born at night, the sun had not quite risen yet, Venus becomes the primary benefic in his chart. And this Venus is in Cancer, ruled by this kind of difficult Scorpio moon. But Venus is in his 12th house. And so that's where benefits come. And among other things, the 12th house would be when we step away from the world, when we would go to rehab, for example. Other things could be just like going into a meditative retreat or just spending time by ourselves. It's when we get away from all the noise of the world that we can start connecting with our deepest self and start that process of being able to function in the world as a whole person. So while he's, certainly had difficult, dark times, he's also, when you look at that Venus, been able to benefit from having, and you can see how it connects to his nodal axis, his north node. He's been able to benefit from having that time to retreat, to look at himself, and to evaluate his life. And so we also see that this Venus helps then this very difficult stellium in Virgo in his second house, through that coming out and coming out from his rehab, looking at the world, examining himself, is going to help him start to feel better about himself as he connects with others. And then also this Neptune, which, you know, has been such a difficult aspect for him, is also in trine to that Venus. So while you can feel that, you know, Matthew Perry has had a very difficult, long road with his addiction, there have been helpers. There have been people who have been able to help him find his path away from addiction and into a world where other people exist, you know, not just himself. And so it's kind of interesting too how he was just fortunate enough, second house, to have the income, to have the savings that he needed to seek some really excellent care as well. And also, what another thing his book does, you know, the book is called Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. He talks a lot about his failed relationships throughout the years, which he's, I think he even broke up with Julia Roberts. So, you know, definitely this is someone who struggled to be a good person in a relationship. And if you have Leo rising, you're always going to meet Saturn in relationships. In one way or another, you're going to meet somebody who says to you, you know, you are not the only person in the world. There are other people out here. The challenge of our relationship is that you start looking at me and figuring out who, you know, that we're in this together, you and me, not just you. And with that Saturn being kind of in square to his descendant, you can see that he would meet Saturn in relationships, and that Saturn in his 10th house, he would think, oh, you know, this person is going to fix me. It's going to be all about me. And so you end up getting into this kind of struggle where, oh, you know, we've been together now for 2 years and I don't feel any different. You know, that Scorpio moon hasn't been fixed. And so then it's moving on to the next relationship, hoping for the that illusory person who's going to somehow make him feel all better. And so another struggle that he does detail in the book is this kind of frustrating quest he's been on. And I'm not sure by the end of the book that he's quite got it. That, you know, we think that Saturn tells him, in opposition to its moon, you have to fix yourself. Someone else is not going to do it for you. You know, with the square there to your descendant and the ruler being Saturn in your 10th house, you have to be the one who fixes yourself. It's when you understand that you're a whole person and that you can bring that whole person to a partnership, and you can see that Saturn with that Venus, that when you start thinking, you know, here's someone that I can contribute to, that I can bring something to, that I can give something to, that we are together, we're going to take care of each other. When he gets to that point, then he's going to start having the relationships he's dreamed of. You know, marrying a mental health nurse who's going to make you feel all better is just not going to happen. So I think that's probably a path that he's on right now, kind of figuring that out. And then if you think about what's going on in his life right now, why is all of a sudden, he's out here with this book and he's talking about his life? Because we established, he's pretty much a person who's tried to seem okay in the world and not really reveal too much about himself. We've got, let's see, if we look at the aspects just for today, which is around the time that he's been talking about his book, we can see that he's having that Saturn-Uranus square that we all are experiencing in his 7th and his 10th houses. And so this is a time, when Saturn is opposing his sun and squaring that Neptune. He's really taking a look at his long path of addiction, but also Saturn's 7th house, long path of difficult and failed relationships. And Uranus up here is also kind of creating that grand cross. So you can see how this is a very significant time for him in facing some things he's probably left unseen over the past decades of his life. But also, if you think other things happening in his chart right now, notice that Neptune is on this north node, which we talked about as being, the direction he needs to go, that I'm not the only person in the world. There are other people out there who have needs, that we need to start, seeing beyond the wall that surrounds me. So that Neptune is kind of opening up that path for him as well. And I also like that Pluto in the late degrees of Capricorn is creating that sort of healing sextile to his Neptune. And another thing that's kind of interesting too is how Pluto is also creating that 150-degree aspect to his sun. So maybe through his healing path, he's seeing where he, has just been off kilter. Things have been awry in how he's looked at himself and who he is in the world. And then finally, we talked about that 12th house, Venus, his greatest benefic, and Uranus right now is creating a lovely sextile to that. So publicly, he's being very open about some very private struggles. But one can hope that maybe with that Venus being lit up by Uranus over the next year or so, that maybe that will bring that kind of relationship into his life, where he is truly a whole and complete partner that can bring truly love and caring to another human being. So in any case, I have high hopes for Matthew Perry. So thank you so much for joining me in this visit, and go check out an old episode of Friends and enjoy Chandler at his best all over again. Thank you. Bye.